You came back. Good. Pull up a chair and try not to make a sound. This is the last whisper. They found the Ranger's truck 3 days later, engine still running, driver's door wide open, headlights burned dead. No blood, no struggle, just his radio, sitting neatly on the driver's seat, still transmitting static into an empty forest. Whatever happened to Walt Bricker that night, it didn't happen fast, and it didn't happen the way anyone wanted to believe. This is his story, pieced together from the one voicemail he left before he vanished, and from a written report he filed 2 years earlier, back when people still thought he was just a man who told good campfire tales. Walt worked as a wildlife control officer in the Cascade foothills, the kind of job where you spend more nights alone in a truck than you do at your own dinner table. Ranchers up there called him when livestock started disappearing, and in the fall of that year, the calls didn't stop. Something was working its way through the herds along Miller's Ridge, and it wasn't behaving like any predator on record. Cougars kill clean. They go for the throat, drag the body somewhere private, and eat what they need. Wolves, when they run in packs, take down the weak ones and leave a trail any tracker can read in 5 minutes. What Walt found on that ridge didn't follow either pattern. Cattle weren't just killed, they were scattered. He'd find a leg 40 yards from a skull, a rib cage another 60 yards past that, like something had picked the animal apart out of curiosity rather than hunger. Ranchers wanted it dead. Walt wanted to understand it first. That mistake cost him. The night it started for real, Walt wasn't even planning to go out. He got a call around 11 from a rancher named Pete Delgado, saying his dogs wouldn't stop screaming at the tree line and that something had been circling his barn for 20 minutes without ever stepping into the light. Walt grabbed his rifle, his spotlight, and drove up alone, because that's what the job paid him to do. He never made it to the barn. About a half-mile from Delgado's property, his headlights caught something crossing the road that made him stop the truck cold. It wasn't a deer. It moved wrong for a deer, too upright, too deliberate, like it wanted to be seen crossing and then wanted to disappear immediately after. He sat there for almost a full minute before he made the second mistake of his life. He got out to look. The report he filed says the woods went dead silent the moment his boots hit the gravel. No crickets, no wind through the branches, nothing. He said it was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, like being underwater. And then, from somewhere off in the dark, came a sound he spent the rest of his life trying to describe to people who didn't believe him. A mix of a woman crying and a large animal growling, layered on top of each other, coming from the same source at the same time. He should have driven straight to Delgado's and waited for backup. Instead, he followed the sound because that's what 14 years on the job had trained him to do. Chase the noise, find the animal, solve the problem. He didn't understand yet that this wasn't a problem that could be solved with a rifle. He found the first sign of it about 200 yards in. A deer, or what used to be one, folded in on itself in a way that a deer's spine simply isn't built to fold. No blood pooled beneath it. The blood was already gone, and not from scavengers, because nothing had touched the meat. Whatever had done this hadn't been hungry. It had been playing. Walt's radio crackled that night with a call to dispatch that still exists in the county archive. And if you listen to it, you can hear his voice shift halfway through the recording, from a working man reporting livestock damage to something closer to a man trying to stay calm while his hands shake. He described tracks in the mud that had 5 fingers instead of paws, walking upright, then dropping to all fours, then upright again, like it kept forgetting which shape it was supposed to be wearing. He followed those tracks to an old fire lookout tower, abandoned since the 70s, half its stairs rotted through. And that's where he saw it directly for the first time, according to the last thing he ever put in writing. It was crouched at the base of the tower, pale, hairless, with skin pulled too tight over a frame that didn't sit right, joints bending at angles that made his stomach turn just watching it move. It wasn't eating, it was arranging things, small bones, laid out in a circle around itself, like a nest, or a ritual, or a warning. When it finally noticed him standing there with his spotlight raised, it didn't attack immediately. It looked directly into the light. Walt wrote that its eyes reflected nothing, no shine, no glow, just 2 flat black voids that swallowed the beam completely, and that in the 2 or 3 seconds it stared back at him, he understood, on some level below language, that this thing wasn't hunting for food, and it wasn't defending territory. It was choosing whether he was worth the effort. He was. It came off the ground in a motion his report describes as wrong, faster than something with that body should move, and he fired 3 rounds before it closed the distance. 2 hit. Neither one slowed it down. He said the last clear thought he had was that its mouth opened far wider than a human jaw allows, and that the sound it made in that final second wasn't animal or human. It was both, screaming at once, out of the same throat. Then the recording cuts to him running, breathing hard into the radio, giving dispatch his coordinates in broken sentences, saying it was behind him, saying it wasn't tired, saying it wasn't even trying to catch him, just staying close enough that he'd never stop hearing it. That's the part that got under the skin of everyone who's heard the tape. Not the growling, the patience. Somewhere in that run, the transmission goes quiet for 11 seconds. Then Walt's voice comes back, steadier than it has any right to be, and he says one sentence dispatch has never been able to fully explain. It's not chasing me, it's hurting me. The recording ends there. His truck was found the next morning with the door open and the engine running, exactly where Delgado said he'd last seen the headlights turn off the main road. No blood, no torn clothing, no drag marks. Search teams worked that ridge for 6 days. They found his spotlight, still on, wedged into the fork of a tree 12 feet off the ground, facing back toward the fire lookout tower, like something had placed it there deliberately, pointed at the one place searchers were least eager to go back to twice. They never found Walt. What they did find, 3 weeks later, buried under leaves near the base of that same tower, was a ring of small bones, arranged in the exact circle he'd described in his last written report, except this time, mixed in among the smaller bones, was a single human finger. The county closed the case as a bear attack. Pete Delgado didn't believe that then, and he doesn't believe it now. He still ranches that land, still loses cattle some years more than others, and he says the same thing every time a new hire asks him why he keeps a rifle loaded by the door, even in broad daylight. He tells them the woods up there don't have a predator problem, they have a permission problem. Something up on that ridge decides who's allowed to leave, and some nights, it simply says no. Whatever crossed that road in front of Walt Bricker's headlights wasn't hunting to survive. It had cattle for that, an entire valley of easy meals it barely touched. What it wanted that night was something else entirely, something closer to entertainment, or ritual, or a test it had run 1,000 times before on 1,000 other men who thought a spotlight and a rifle made them the most dangerous thing in those trees. They weren't. They never are. So here's the question worth sitting with tonight, long after this video ends and the lights in your own house feel a little too dim. If something out there isn't hunting you for food, isn't defending territory, and isn't afraid of your gun, your dog, or your headlights, what exactly is it deciding in those few seconds it stares back at you? And when it finally makes up its mind, is there anything you could have done differently? Or were you just the next name on a list it wrote a long, long time before you ever stepped into those woods?